Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Sonnet, the owner and creator behind Sonnet's Garden Blooms, and in today's video, you guys have been asking for it and you are getting a Thrift to treasure. So 5 items that I recently thrifted and I am transforming them into beautiful treasures. I hope you enjoy today's video and I cannot wait to hear what you guys think. For our very first project, I recently thrifted this at the Goodwill Bins, and you guys, what caught my eye was I loved the detail around the edge, and I also loved those brass knobs. They just were so cool. I really didn't know the intended purpose. I kind of figured it was probably to house like a notepad, but I had an idea right away what I wanted to do with it, and it was definitely to upcycle it. And so the first thing I'm doing is I am taking off the brass knobs. I'm going to remove that completely, and then we're going to clean up the entire piece. And I want to make sure that I don't misplace any of these pertinent pieces that will put this all back together. So make sure you put your items in a safe place. As you can see, there's some white paint that was on here. I want to make sure that I sand that off. It did feel like a bit raised, and I do plan on using some decoupage paper on here, so I want to make sure it's nice and smooth. I am using a decoupage paper called Springy by Upcycled paper. And if you watched my recent live, I used a portion of this paper on that door, and I thought this is going to be the perfect paper to use on this piece. But look at this door, you guys. Is that not the coolest? I also thrifted that recently, and that upcycle was so easy, and you can watch it on my live from this past week. Now, this portion of the paper, I'm going to use the other half of that top piece, and I want just a few of those beautiful flowers in there, and then the lower half, I want all that beautiful font. For starters, I am using the color called beadboard, and I am going to paint just the inside of the board, the color beadboard. And the reason I'm starting with white paint, and I've said this multiple times on my videos, is that white will really make my paper pop. Yes, you don't have to start with a white base. If you want more of a muted look, definitely go there. You can actually use other colors under your paper as well, and you'll get a completely different effect. I just recommend that if you want your paper to really pop, start with a white base. I should also mention that all the products that I'm using in today's video you can find out on my website at www.sonnetsgardenblooms.com, and let's get back to the video. So I am going to apply 2 even coats to this piece. I'm going to let it dry very thoroughly, and then we're going to start decoupaging it. I lay out my paper and I try to figure out what I actually want on the piece. So like how much of each of the flowers, how much of the font, where I want to actually position it. And then I cut that portion of the paper off. Now, this is when I'm like, how am I going to make sure that I get those circles just right, or the holes just right for those 2 metal pieces that stick out? And I started brainstorming, and I finally came up with a solution. As you can see, I figured out where I want my paper. I am using the IOD permanent ink. I'm inking up just the very tips of those metal pieces. I'm going to flip it over, and then I'm going to take that metal piece and I'm going to stamp it. So that way I'll know exactly where I need to put those holes. And the first time around, the right side didn't stamp so great, but I put a little bit more pressure on it, and then I had a perfect stamping of each of those. I took a pen, and then I just popped a little pen hole for each one, and this worked out absolutely perfect, you guys. I flipped it over and I put it on, and it was a perfect fit. I could not believe it. So now all I need to do is start decoupaging it on. I am going to do just like I always do, leave it just as is. I am going to cut off a little bit of excess paper though around the edges. It'll just give me better control over my piece. And I'm going to flip it back, just like I always do with my other projects. Flip that paper back, do a starter strip, and once I get the starter strip done and I work out all of the air bubbles and any wrinkles that may have occurred, I then just start working my way down. There was a little bit of finagling around those two metal pieces, but it worked out so smooth, and I love how this piece is coming together. Now that it's dry, I'm just taking a piece of sandpaper. In a downward motion, I am removing all the excess paper. And that is key, that you want to make sure your decoupage paper is completely dry before you start this step. But this is so satisfying seeing it all come together, and it goes really quick. Once you get that done, I do recommend applying one more even coat of your decoupage medium. I love using liquid patina. It is definitely my go-to, but I know that there are some others that have a different go-to. So again, I just love liquid patina with my recycled paper. And once that is done, let it completely dry a second time, and then we're going to put this all back together. There were a few little spots on the edges that just did not completely have good adhesion. So that's why I always recommend always applying 1 second coat of your medium. And if there are any corners or edges that haven't completely stuck down, just lift the paper up, add a little bit more of your decoupage medium, and then smooth it out. And then apply 1 even coat, like I said, and you'll be good to go. We're going to let this dry, and then at this point, this is when I determined that it needed a little bit of something. So I am going to add a little bit of clear wax and dark wax just around the edges. I start putting it all back together. So I reapply that wood piece. I put on those washers and the little eye screws. And that's when I'm like, I think it needs something. I just felt like it just needed a little bit more blending or like something to it. So I broke out the DIY clear wax and the DIY dark wax. And the reason I break out both of them is the clear wax, I just put a little thin layer down. Then I start adding in the dark wax. It gives me better control of my dark wax. And I apply what I want, and then I use a piece of paper towel and kind of blend it a little bit further. And then you can keep on adding a little bit more dark wax and blending until you get that perfect look that you're going for. And I just think this added just a little bit of, like I said, something. I added a little bit of the dark wax also to that little wood piece across the top, and this project is done. Now on to project 2. I recently thrifted these at the Goodwill Bins, and they were actually in 4 different pieces. So somebody had popped these pictures right out of their frames, and I ended up finding all 4. These are so beautiful. They're vintage. Somebody handmade them, and I definitely wanted to rescue them. So my vision here is we are going to do something to the frames and really make those images pop. I think they're just absolutely stunning, and I love them.
The first thing I want to point out is that you can see these tags say $5 each. They must have been in a rummage sale and they didn't sell, and then they got donated. Now, I think the reason they didn't sell because the frames are very outdated. The first thing I'm going to do is remove these nails. Whoever had put these in that frame had tried to use these super long nails and they were like half sticking out, and maybe somebody didn't even just take them apart. Maybe they fell apart when they were in the bins. So that is the first thing I did, was remove these nails, and then we're going to start on the frames. I have everything laid out, and if you look at these pictures, there's little bits of pink in each one. So my vision here is I want to paint the frames pink, and I was going to use Tickled Pink by Sweet Pickins. Now, I have sampled the Crackle Medium from Sweet Pickins recently, and you guys, I am slightly obsessed with this. It's so cool. I love it. Years ago, I had a Crackle Medium that I used, and it was discontinued. Now that I found this, I think I'm going to be crackling everything. So the first time I used it, I applied Crackle over my entire piece, and I felt like it was a bit too much Crackle. So in today's video, what my vision or how I plan on doing this is I am going to apply a little bit of Crackle here and there. And if you apply the Crackle very thin, you get tiny, thin Crackle lines. If you apply it thicker, you get thicker lines. So just to give you an idea, so I am going to randomly apply it all over each of the frames. And then in a couple areas, I'm going to go back and apply it just a little bit thicker, so there's some variation in the amount of Crackle. While the Crackle was drying, my vision slightly changed, guys. So it does take typically 2 hours for your Crackle Medium to dry, and I wanted to test out if I could use something other than Sweet Pickins milk paint with the Crackle from Sweet Pickins. So I am using Fusion's mineral paint in the color Rosewater, and the key here is you want to apply one coat, just a nice swipe. What I discovered too is if you swipe too many times when you're using the Crackle, it kind of messes the Crackle up. So you don't want to overwork an area is a good way to put it. So I apply just a nice even coat to the entire piece, and almost immediately you can start seeing the Crackle starting to appear. I grab the second frame, I do exactly the same thing. I apply just a nice even coat to the entire piece. When I'm completely finished, I do want to just mention that on the back, I also finished the back of the frame. There was a bit of like fingerprints and things like that on the back. And just because I'm reselling this, I want it to look really nice and finished. So I always finish the back of items as well. Next, I grab my brad nailer and 1 1/4 inch brad nails. Now, this has been by far one of my best investments, guys. I do have it linked in the description below if you're interested, but honestly, I have used it so many times on so many projects, and it is super easy that I honestly don't know what I did without it before. Let's put this back together. Flip your frame over, flip the picture over, slide it back in, and the key is to angle your brad nailer. You don't want to just shoot it right into the frame because you'll have it sticking out the front. So by angling it like they did with those nails, they were angled, it works perfect. I just put one in on a nail in on each of the sides, and it held way better than those nails. For project 3, I recently found this basket, and honestly, I love a handcrafted basket more than anything. They are so high end, except this one, you guys, it was a bit faded. And so I decided I wanted to do a whitewash on it, and I am going to use Sweet Pickens milk paint called Flower Sack. If you haven't used Flower Sack before, or I should say Sweet Pickens milk paint before, it's super easy. It is a 1-to-1 ratio, so 1 part milk paint to 1 part warm water is what I use. And I put them both in a clear plastic container, and I like to use clear so that when I'm mixing it, I can see if anything is stuck on the bottom. So I have a tiny little whisk, and I just whisk it up and I let it sit for 10 minutes. And by letting it sit for 10 minutes, it thickens up into like a melted milkshake form, and then you're ready to use it. It sat for roughly 10 minutes. I'm going to remix it up, and then I am going to apply 1 even coat over the entire piece. The look I'm going for here is just a whitewash type of look. I thought about using a different paint, but milk paint was really what I decided to go with because it absorbs so well into like bare wood like this. And I think that this basket just turned out so beautifully, you guys. Now, milk paint typically does need to be sealed, and I just like the look so much that I just decided to leave it as is. I'm going to see if, how well it holds up, but I absolutely loved it. One other thing I should mention is I applied 1 even coat. I let it really absorb, and then I had a bit extra, and then I just randomly wiped the rest all over the basket, and it almost created like a two-tone-ish color. So I'm very excited with how it turned out, and I cannot wait to get this into my home decor. For project 4, I recently thrifted this riser. It is so cool. I loved the feet. There were actually 2 of them. Unfortunately, one had a broken leg, so I only grabbed this one. And my vision here is I want to paint it and bring out all that beautiful detail in the feet. So I first off take it apart, clean it up a bit, and we are going to now paint it. I'm using DIY's beadboard. If you have yet to use DIY paint, it can virtually stick to anything. Once it's sealed, it is sealed. So I am applying 2 even coats. In between each coat, I do let it dry very thoroughly. And anytime you're using DIY paint, it can be reactivated with water until it's sealed. So always keep that in mind. You do have to apply a top coat with the DIY paint. Second note, some of you may be questioning, like, why are you painting this? It's beautiful. I thrifted it, and this is really its last hope. So what I have known is when I paint these beautiful silver pieces and distress them back, they sell virtually immediately. If I would just put this in my booth as is, it would never sell. Or, well, I shouldn't say never. There's always someone that might buy it. So I am upcycling it, and I'm bringing out all the beautiful detail in these legs. Now that I've painted it with 2 coats and let it dry, I'm taking a damp rag and we are going to wet distress it. If you have yet to wet distress anything, it's super easy. Just takes a little elbow grease, and what I like to do is just rub over all the raised areas, and that really brings out all that beautiful detail. I love the lions on this piece, and I'm just kind of rubbing a little extra on the face of the lion to like make his eyes pop and his feet. I have been asked if you can wet distress with any paint, and if it has a top coat in it, you cannot. Typically, you can wet distress with DIY because it is a clay-based paint. Possibly with chalk paints, you can wet distress, but it just is such an easy way to distress an item with more control. I broke out the stamp set called Antiquities from IOD. If you guys like the stamp set called Crockery, you'll love this one too. It has so many cool stamps. There are a few additional crockery stamps on here, but oh my gosh, look at those little guys like the deer and the other guy with the top hat. What I decided to use on here is the two lions, and I thought it would work perfectly with the little lion feet. I am taking a piece of thin mount. I like to take a piece of thin mount and cut it into different chunks or different sizes so that I can grab that depending on what size stamp I'm using. I'm going to apply that stamp on my thin mount, and then I'm using IOD's permanent ink. And this is the first time I'm using this stamp, so I ink it up and I stamp it on the brown paper just to make sure that it's going to look good. I thought about it, I'm like, okay, I don't even know what this is going to look like. Sometimes I use a stamp and I'm like, oh, I don't like it. So I thought, well, I'm going to stamp it and just get an idea, and once I stamped it, I loved it. So I re-ink it back up, and then I centerize it on that circle and I stamp. And the key with that is you want to, once you lay your stamp down, hold it in place and just lightly rub over the entire stamp just to get a really good adhesion. The last thing that I recommend that you do, like I said earlier, you do need to seal your DIY paint. I'm using Big Top, and I am just applying one even coat of Big Top to the entire piece, and then I'm going to let that dry, reassemble, and then this project will be complete. For our fifth and final project, I found this while I was out thrifting and I loved it. I loved the top, and honestly, when you look at it in person, you don't see that round circle, but on camera you do, which I find to be so funny. I am using the color Faded Burlap, and I am painting the top Faded Burlap, and then I'm going to paint the base of it beadboard. This is kind of like a piece of fabric, but it's kind of like a harder fabric, so I thought this would work perfectly. And if you didn't know, DIY paint can be used to actually paint fabric. You can actually paint your furniture with DIY paint. And if you are doubting me, Debbie Beard, the owner of DIY Paint, has an awesome video out on her channel where she actually painted the couch that she uses to this day. I had the opportunity to go to her paint inlay reveal party, and she actually invited us all back to her place, and I was able to sit on it, and yes, it's absolutely gorgeous. So the key is, typically with fabric, you want to use a misting bottle when you apply the DIY paint to really like get that paint absorbed into that fabric. You're almost like staining it or like coloring it, where this piece, this is kind of like a vinylish fabric. I don't know how to describe it. So once I applied it, there was no need to mist it or really get it in there. And then I seal it and it is good to go. My initial vision for this piece was I wanted to do faded burlap on top and then paint the base, the beadboard like I've been using. And as I'm editing this video and really looked at it, I'm like, maybe I should have painted the base the same color that I actually used for the stencil. But at this point, I didn't know I was going to stencil anything. I had a totally different vision. And it's very funny as I create or upcycle items. It's kind of like whatever, I just start creating and I come up with ideas as I go. So I think that in the end, I probably should have probably painted it black or like the same color as the stencil, but I'm still loving it and I can't wait to hear what you guys think in the comments. This is when I determined I wanted to stencil. So I grabbed the JRV stencil that I have had for ages and I've gotten so much use out of it. I'm also using a JRV stencil brush. I had the opportunity to use this when I was at Debbie Beard's paint inlay party, and you guys, using it sold it to me that I loved it so much that I now carry the stencil brush line on my website. So they come in 4 different sizes. Anyway, what you need to have a good stencil is you need a good stencil brush and you need some good paint. And you want to make sure your stencil brush is offloaded. So I am making sure first and foremost that I have this centerized, and I used to eyeball it, but no matter what, it always would never be perfectly in the center, and I would always try to blame it that I had a crooked eye. So now I measure it all and it's pretty accurate. And first and foremost, I am going to dip my stencil brush in the paint and I am going to offload it, and then I am going to go in and stencil. And by offloading it, your stencil brush isn't like super oozy and it's going to give you a really nice, crisp, clean image. I find that sometimes when people get impatient with stenciling, they load up their brush too much, and then that's when you get that oozing out from underneath the stencil. The paint that I'm using is called Cast Iron, and it is a Fusion mineral paint. And I recently started carrying Fusion mineral paint as well. It has a built-in top coat, so there's really no reason to seal this, except that the top that I painted faded burlap needs to be sealed. So after I'm done doing the stencil on here, I'm going to let the entire piece completely dry, and then I will seal the whole piece with Big Top. And DIY paint can be sealed with any type of top coat, guys. So you can use Big Top from DIY, or you can use a poly or any type of wax, just something to seal it. The last thing I'm doing here is I am going to wet distress the legs, just make them look a little bit more distressed looking. And once that's done, I let that dry, and then I'm going to seal the legs as well.
It's been a bit since I've done a thrift to treasure, so I definitely owed you guys one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I cannot wait to hear what your favorite item is. I am hoping to have another one finished by Monday. I have it half done. This weekend though, honestly guys, there is an area in my home, it's actually in my basement. It's basically, I call my daughter's room the dungeon. This is my dungeon, you guys, because when I don't know where to put something, it just goes in this area and it is out of control. So in my membership group, we are tackling a space in our home to completely clean up and get organized, and it is due by Tuesday. Yes, this coming Tuesday. So I am way behind and I'm the fearless leader and I have to set an example here. I'm telling everybody else to get organized and I haven't even started, but I am juggling a lot of balls. So Saturday and Sunday, I am tackling this space. It is unheard of in February in Wisconsin. We are going to get up to near 50. So I'm taking advantage of it and I am going to haul everything out of this area. Again, I'm going to have plastic containers lined up in my driveway. I'm going to try to reorganize everything and we'll see how far I get. You might even get a video on that. We'll see. Anyways, hopefully, fingers crossed, I get it done. But I'm like I said, I'm really shooting for another thrifted treasure for you. And I hope you guys are enjoying my content that I'm putting out. And if you do, definitely hit that subscribe button, turn on your bell notification so that every Monday and Friday when I upload a video, you'll be notified. And if you like today's video, give it a thumbs up and let other people know about my channel. So go ahead, share it out. Anyways, you guys have yourselves a great weekend and we will see you Monday. Bye.